Take
What
two.
is it? Grayson said, "What?"
Hello, hello, and welcome to our premiere. We hope this is the premiere
You're
episode.
live,
That
I
was.
promise.
We're live now. Okay. Our premiere episode of Dark Shad-Bros. I am just one of your hosts, Peter Mack, and some of you may know me from the interviews that I've done for my other virtual chat show, Mac and Chat. I've sat down and chatted with Marie Wallace, Lara Parker, and Kathryn Leigh Scott. But the last 2 years, I think it's just about 2 years, I started chatting with the gentleman who is kind of sort of sitting next to me at the moment. And we've just been going back and back endlessly on Facebook, sending each other voice messages talking about DS, about essentially what we love about it, very little about what we don't like about it, because I think there's very little we don't like about Dark Shadows. And that includes my other half. But let me introduce you to one of your hosts for the evening, one of our panelists, one of the Dark Shad-Bros, Michael Panzerato.
Good evening. There's the green light. There it is. Hello, everybody. Yep, it's true. It's about 2 years now. We've we've been doing this magpie chatting about the love of the series, um, and so this is really exciting. It's like coffee talk, but for Dark Shadows. You want me to tell my
Exactly.
story?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Should we
Totally. So
start in?
this is let's we'll just we're gonna talk about how we all got introduced to Dark Shadows. So let's start with Michael.
All right. So my this goes back a piece, a three generational thing. I'm 50 in June, so I'm old enough. The My grandmother was a huge movie fan all of her life, and she loved Joan Geraldine Bennett. And so when news had gotten out that there was going to be a new soap opera with Joan Bennett in it, my grandmother was, absolutely ecstatic. So my father came home from school one day, and my grandmother was sitting down in front of the television. She was watching this new soap opera. She said, "Why don't you grab some?" It was a Coke and some donuts. She got the Coke and donuts and sat down and watch Dark Shadows with me. It's got Joan. So he sat and watched the first. Was it a year before Jonathan, before Barnabas was introduced? Anyway, they were hooked, and he was literally one of those who ran home from school to watch Dark Shadows. Anyway, my father was so impacted that he had a coat that he wore all the time with his collar up. And I was just telling Peter that he had an art project that he drew a picture of Barnabas off of a gum card and got a wonderful grade on. But anyway, when I came along, I loved the Universal Cycle horror films at probably age 4. And my favorite was Dracula, Bela Lugosi's Dracula. And my father would always, he'd sit up with me, watch these movies and all of that. And he said, there's a show that I wish would come back on that you would have loved. It was called Dark Shadows. It not only involved vampires, but it had witches, warlocks, ghosts, werewolves. So for a young horror film fan, that was Eden. Dark Shadows was a place that I only had heard of, never seen. And then one day they announced on Channel 45, local Baltimore television, that it was coming back. 5 o'clock every day, Monday through Friday. So I became one of those kids who rushed home to watch the reruns. So impacted was I that I used to dress up all the time anyway in nice clothing because of Bela Lugosi and all of those guys, Vincent Price and Boris Karloff. But when Barnabas came, baby, I was in a suit every day to school. I got a cheap ring after I lost his graduation ring on my cheap onyx ring that turned my finger green that I wore every day, and a bamboo cane that I would carry around that I had sawed down. My father sort of snapped when I asked for an ascot and a cape at 8 years old. He said, "I'm not buying my 9-year-old ascot or a cape. Go away." So that's began a love affair that never ended to this day. Now my children are on occasion watching Dark Shadows with Daddy. They're Quentin fans more than Barnabas, but we won't talk about that. So that's my story.
So that was your so. But after the initial, when you were watching it in syndication, when would you say you got back into watching it again? Was it in the 80s?
Yeah, so what happened was they moved it from 5 o'clock every day to 11:30 on Saturdays at first. So it came on then just prior to a local creature feature called Ghost Host. So it would be Dark Shadows, an episode, and then the lead into Ghost Host, which would be a different horror film every week, kind of like a Fright Night sort of deal. And then they moved it to Sunday nights, and that created quite a panic because I couldn't stay up till 11:30 on Sunday nights. So my father would send me to bed at 8. We had a deal, we had an arrangement. I would go to bed at 8 o'clock or 8:30 on a Sunday, and he would wake me up so that I could watch Benny Hill and Shadows. And then I'd have to go back to bed, and I was not allowed to tell my mother about this arrangement. So then it went on. I kind of went off the air again for a little while, and I kind of lost it for a bit. I was very, very upset about that. And then, by then, everybody in the neighborhood had a VHS, so we were able to get more Universal, so that kind of concentrated me there. But then oh God, when right when the revival hit, you started to get the MPI
Yeah.
tapes out, and I grabbed them as soon as I could get them. The Best Barnabas, my favorite. I loved that. I still do. And then the revival series, I really got into that. And but there were things about Dark Shadow, like the cane. I had many canes and black shellac canes, but none of his. I didn't have that cane. And there were many rings, but never could you find a ring that looked quite that good. So I was always chasing something from Dark Shadows. And then the Sci-Fi Channel. When the Sci-Fi Channel put it on, I was finally able to see like the timeline. I only got as far as 1795, and then a bit into Adam. I never even saw Eve before it was canceled as a kid. So that's how long it took when you're running a friggin' 5-year half-hour series one night a week. It was painful, but I finally got to see that, and I got obsessed all over again. And now it never ends. It's either it's always Dark Shadows, even if it's one episode, during breakfast or one episode at night. It's there's always, and the movie of course generated a little bit of interest again, and
Sure.
with my kids, and Barnabas became kind of to my youngest son like a superhero, than just a tragic figure.
I love it.
So
I
that's
love
me.
it.
S- Still loving it, baby.
For myself, it's funny you mentioned how your family got into it because of Joan Bennett. My mom, my not my mom, my godmother and my grandmother, they watched from day one too, so, which is kind of rare. I find there's not a lot of fans who watched from the get go, but they did. They were ABC loyalists in terms of their viewing, and I think probably for my Grams it was because of Joan Bennett, and also because it was kind of spooky and eerie. So they watched from the get go, and then once Barnabas came into it, my godmother was one of those that she went to a Catholic school that was nowhere near where they lived in Mespeth, Queens, and she showed me once where she had to run from, and man, did she run home to get there in time. She was thrilled. I think they finally moved it back to 4:30. Eventually, they because they knew the kids were kind of missing the first 15 minutes. Um, so fade out, fade in. I'm 4 years old, and it's April of 1982. Um, and I can no longer lie about my age as a result of just that. But um, NBC decides they're going to put it into reruns, and we're living in Queens Village. Afternoon, my brother has a bunch of his friends over after school, and my grandma Mary, who was the best in the world, she's like, "All right, now you all can't stay too long because I got to bring the boys inside. I'm going to show them Boniface." And She always called him Boniface. Don't
Boniface.
ask me why. She never got it as Barnabas, but it was Boniface. But I just remember being brought in and watching it, and my first the thing that sticks in my head is the hand coming out of the coffin and seeing the onyx ring and just being gobsmacked by that. So I think we watched as long as it was on. It wasn't on NBC too long in reruns, if memory serves. Then we moved to Long Island, and that's when New Jersey Network started showing it. And at that point, I believe I tuned in. They were into the color episodes just at the beginning of The Cure with Julia. And I fell in love with Grayson Hall. Just, I was cuckoo, absolutely cuckoo for Grayson. Um, I remember that Home Alone episode distinctly. We all call it Julia's Home Alone episode, where she's alone in Collinwood and the piano starts playing and she's screaming like a banshee. That great moment in the mausoleum where, and I've always wondered, was it Barnabas or Sarah? I'm assuming that it was Barnabas, that the blood starts oozing out of the plaque that has Sarah's name on it.
Stolen by Amityville Horror.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Um, and then what would happen was they were up against public access news. So every once in a while I would tune in and Dark Shadows wouldn't be on. It would be like real news. So like
Oh,
3, 4 days in a row would go by and there would be no Dark Shadows. And then all of a sudden you're tuning in and they're wearing 18th century costumes. And now you're in 1795.
yeah.
Anybody who lived out on the island apparently went through that same weirdness in terms of, they would get preempted for the news. And the last memory I have of that is the episode where Angelique sends Barnabas and Josette the present, and they open it up, and it's the skull in the box. Um, Kathryn Leigh Scott letting out one of those blood curdling screams as only she can do it. um, and then a couple of years went by, and we were at West Coast Video near my grandparents' home in Maspeth, Queens. And there was the introduction of Barnabas Collins, and then volumes 2 and 3. And I scooped those up. Binge watched them. I was binge watching long before it was hip to binge watch. And then slowly they started to get the other volumes in. And I noticed at the end of the tapes that there was an address for the Dark Shadows Festival in Maplewood, New Jersey. So we wrote to them. I think they were hawking the book, The Introduction to Barnabas Collins. So my mom ordered it for me. And that's what led me to the information for the Dark Shadows conventions. And I went to my first Dark Shadows convention in 1990, which took a lot of begging and pleading and crying and maybe even stamping my feet a little bit. Um,
Holding of the breath.
Holding of the breath. Well, they promised me it was a 3-day event. It was a Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And Frid was only going to be there. Barnabas was only going to be there on Sunday. So they kept trying to bargain with me, like, oh, well, why don't we just go on Sunday so you can meet Barnabas? And eventually
Uh,
I won out. And they took turns, and Carol took me Aunt Carol and Mom took me the first night. Then Aunt Carol took me all day Saturday. I was dressed the whole weekend as little Barnabas. I had a little homemade caped coat that my grandma made for me. I had a little onyx
that's
ring,
awesome.
not quite like this. And then they went to the drugstore. They bought me a cane, and my grandmother, with nail polish, painted the shaft black and then painted the top with silver nail polish so that it would look anything remotely like Jonathan's cane so that I could have the whole costume.
Oh, that's really sweet though. That's a
Yeah.
really sweet story.
Yeah. So that was my first that was how I really like jumped in with both feet. And then we just started ordering the MPI home videotapes um when they became available that way, and everybody says how they ran home from school to watch Dark Shadows. I ran home from school to see if the UPS man had delivered my MPI home videotapes.
Where's my friggin' tape? That's
Um,
awesome.
so I'll jump in here. And by the way, I am going to limit my time on camera. We had some technical issues, so I'm actually upstairs in our bedroom, um, and I have not had a chance to change into my show outfit. So I apologize. And apparently, I'm an angel sent from God. Um, how did I get involved with Dark Shadows? Well, Peter and I have been together 21 and a half years. And 21 years ago, I was asked to go with Peter to a Dark Shadows festival at the Brooklyn Marriott. And I didn't know anything about Dark Shadows, which is odd because my family also was an ABC family, General Hospital, especially all my children.
Your mom watched it.
My mom did watch it. But I didn't have a consciousness of it until I met Peter. And I went to the festival. Part of the reason they needed me to go to the festival is that there were skits by the Collinsport players, and they're always short on men. And so am I. No, I'm kidding. But they asked me to play. They asked me to play a part, and so that was my initial exposure to the show. But then one day, a few weeks later, Peter is watching Dark Shadows, and it's the black and white episodes. And I started asking questions. I said, "Who's that? Now she's related to," and then Peter would say something. I said, "No, no, quiet. I'm watching." And I really started to fall in love with it with the black and white episodes before Barnabas. And then, last but not least, is we've been blessed, both Peter and myself, in that we have become friends with several people on the show. Lara Parker, and we did a show with Nancy Barrett many years ago for several weeks in New York City, and we are very close with Marie Wallace. In fact, she texted us a few moments before this very performance and told us to break a leg. So we're blessed on that front to get to actually know some of the actresses. And I don't want to talk about Laura right now. I know that the boys will talk about her because I can't. So that's how I got involved with Dark Shadows.
I just want to take it back just for a second with how John got involved because we did John and I have a parody show that we do called The Original Golden Girls Live on Stage, and we opened it that summer that John was going to be going to his first Dark Shadows convention, and he was brought in to play Todd Jennings in this House of Dark Shadows spoof that we were doing. But he was so besotted with us getting Golden Girls opened that it was really kind of an afterthought. And so it was the following year when I was writing a skit where we were utilizing, and I hate to, oh, there we are as the Golden Girls. um, I was writing this skit and I was utilizing the storyline of Jason McGuire and Elizabeth, which is, I think, one of the most underrated storylines on the show. I love that storyline. I love Dennis Patrick. I think he was one of the most delicious villains on the show. I mean, the brogue alone was worth the price of admission with Dennis Patrick. But John, he was being a little bit blasé about Dark Shadows, and I'm sitting there watching the tapes, taking notes for this show, and then it's like, well, who is that? What, they're related to who? And I'm trying. But let me watch. So by the time we got to the end of that tape, and it's saying, now stay tuned for more episodes from MPI Home Video, John is like, is that it? That's not it, is it? I'm like, no, there's more. Do you want to watch?
That's great.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
the reaction of a very close friend of mine when I made them watch the revival, and there was no more to offer. He was so angry with me. I didn't even think about that, but she was like, "I hate this show," and then she watched it, and she got extremely interested, and then nada.
I want us to spend a whole episode about talking about the 91 series because it is so underrated. It was so well done. Every time, well, you and I have talked about this, Michael. Every time you go back and look at it, they really did. I think they did a great job with it. Were you
Oh yeah.
as anxious for it as I was? Because I know I was waiting with bated breath when that show was going to
Oh
premiere
my
on
God,
NBC.
yeah. Oh yes. I remember getting a oh, what the hell was it? Was some magazine like Fangoria or something, some routine monster mag, and they had
Sure.
the now I guess famous picture of Ben Cross in a very updated suit, the jacket, the famous Barnabas K coat, and he has the cane. He's very comfortably holding the cane with it ring on, and I thought, oh, this is the new look. This is the new, everything is different. You notice the little thing. The stone is smaller, but that's so cool. Or the cane is the exact same, or he doesn't have the bangs. What happened to the bangs? So I was really anxious to see. And then you go into the whole, okay, so are they going to go through who's going to play Angelique, or are they going to have a Nicholas Blair? Are they going to have and so all that crazy anticipation was, and the movie was phenomenal. It was just the bloody war. Would have Could have been. They had at least a few more years in them.
Oh yeah, but you mean the NBC series?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh God,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Because when I went to the convention, they had a gentleman there from NBC, and at that point, the show had not been picked up. NBC had decided not to pick it up. But what they did was they said, stay calm because there is such a thing as mid-season replacements. So he brought with him a slideshow of various pictures of scenes from the actual pilot and then just random cast shots. And everyone in the auditorium was told, put your phones away. Anything that takes a photo, no video cameras. This was like FBI time because they were
Right.
not allowed to divulge any of this stuff. So we got to see at least photos of what it was going to look like if they picked it up. And then I think it was shortly thereafter. That was June of '90, and I think by was it September that they had announced that they were going to pick it up for January of 1991. Um, so they certainly gave us a little taste of it, and I just could not wait. Could not wait. I think it was January 12th or 13th of 1991, Sunday night, and
I think it was a Sunday night. Yeah.
I thought it was great. I loved the new show. There were some changes that kind of irked me as a hardcore fan, um,
Mm.
but for the most part, I thought they all did a damn good job.
Oh yeah. It's one of those things where they stuck to the flavor of the original series but giving it a little new blood. With which today they
So to
don't.
speak.
They seem to want to go in a completely different direction, than was done before. And I think sometimes that screws the whole dynamic up. I won't name names, but anyway, they do tend to go in a whole different direction, which I think is sometimes. I mean, sometimes it works out, but they did beautifully. And Barbara Steele was genius, and adding a. I mean, like Joe, we were saying how Joan Bennett brought family to our families to the original, which was the idea. Get an anchor actress. They're going to draw like Peter Cushing and Alec Guinness in Star Wars. They were still very big stars at the time, and so that drew people in. So they did their job. But I remember being shocked a little bit that they had Gene Simmons because she had done something. Well, so did Joe Bennett, really so far removed from Dark Shadows. But I thought it was brilliant because Gene Simmons was a very, very much like a Joan Bennett, very beautiful when she, still very attractive, whereas they say handsome woman, very handsome woman. But Barbara Steele I mean, phenomenal. That was genius. So I think they really did a great job.
I think the only thing I would have liked to see more of was at all. It just and I understand that a couple of people were under consideration from the original series. There were rumblings that they had approached Louis Edmonds to possibly reprise his role as Joshua. I think John Carlin was also under consideration for for the role of Joshua, rather than having Stefan Gurash come in as another character after being killed off as Professor Woodard. But that's the only thing that I thought was kind of missing. In fact, I think someone out there keep me honest on this. I'm pretty sure that Kathryn tested for something, or it might have been for that 2004 pilot. I think she might have tested to play Elizabeth for that unpicked, the not picked up 2004 WB pilot. Um, but there were rumblings
That would have been a
about
stroke of genius.
Yeah, there are
yeah.
people. Somebody just commented on the wall, and Brian, I'm reading this. Brian said you are absolutely correct. She did test for the reboot. But then also, don't you remember, babe? They told us, Kathryn specifically and Lamar, that the intent was if there had been a second season, that they would have been on the show.
On the NBC series, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, Lamar was upset when it was canceled. She said, "I loved the new show. I wanted to be on it." That was her. That was that was her response to it. She wasn't crazy about the depiction of Angelique, which is really not Lizette Anthony's fault. They just kind of went a little more Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction with her Angelique versus what. But that was also the brilliance of what Lamar did with Angelique. I mean, she didn't want to play the witch, and so she imbued all of this kind of damselness, for lack of a better word. And like Jonathan playing the sympathetic vampire, it worked. You felt bad. You felt bad for Angelique.
They had a dynamic in the original series where the scene is Barnabas comes in that really cool green. I'm all about the fashion. He came with a really cool green coat and said, "Angelique, can we at least? I think we can be very good friends." That whole scene and he was trying to get her to forgive him for having had his way with her and left her for Gisette, but that was never going to happen in the new. I mean, he couldn't stand the sight of her in the new series. And Ross was always kicking her off of the out of the room, or it was rough. It was very rough. It was a whole, and it gave a whole to me. And I loved Ben Cross's character, but it gave a whole different feeling to Barnabas. Like he was a lot, like you said, you felt a little bit for Lara Parker's Angelique. Well, I get why she's pissed off, and I mean, she may have gone a little bit too far, but I get it. And but with this, you're like, oh God, maybe you kind of deserved a little bit of this roughness. So,
He had it coming.
yeah, they would have never been friends.
I don't know how they would have. I wondered about that too. I was because we were talking about that recently, how they would have reconciled it. I know that Lizette had signed on to come back as Laura Collins in the second season. And so they were going to kill two birds with one stone and eliminate Cassandra. And so that's how that was going to go down. Would have been interesting, I guess.
To me, that would have been huge. That would have been a huge because I love the fight between Angelique and Laura.
Oh,
I
yes.
love that fight, and the fact that it also lays out that whole Angelique is not letting anybody kill Barnabas, but Barnabas, this curse, I mean, but her, this curse is serious. Nobody's threatening him. I don't care what, if you mess with him, you mess with me because this is my curse. This is my pet project. That whole thing would have gone. And that fight was beautiful
Yes.
between the two
Yeah,
of
that
them. Who doesn't
when
want to
she
see a
pulls
nuke
the
like
steak
that?
out of her.
Oh, I'm telling you. And the fact that they're going and they're trying to figure out what the other one is. Like Laura's like, "What are you? What's going on here? I have power too." And that's all great stuff to me. And in the audio dramas, it comes back the whole Laura and Angelique relationship. So they would have messed
Yeah.
that up too.
Yeah, it
So
would have been an odd choice to have, yeah, because who would have been her nemesis then? What would they have done in 1897 or 1891, which is probably where they would have gone. Those were the little things as a fan that as a kid, I mean, as a stupid 13-year-old, I was like, it's not 1790, it's 1795. What's wrong with them?
oh yeah, right. Oh no. I remember thinking that too. uh, uh, uh.
But I guess they
I
wanted to make
think
it
they
as
did do some cool
close.
things. Like he said, Barnabas was a crack shot. So the indication was that this fight between Jeremiah and Barnabas isn't going to be a fight. In fact, he says in execution, it's not. He can't outshoot his brother. I thought that was a cool dynamic to add to Barnabas. I thought that the whole character just was a little bit rougher to me than. But I love Jonathan Fridge. You can never beat him to me.
No, Fred,
He's my
Fred. I
guy.
mean, I'll always give Ben his props because I mean, we do get the fans who, and if you're out there watching, because this is a safe haven for everyone. This is an all-inclusive Dark Shadows chat, and we all know that Dark Shadows appeals to the disenfranchised for all the obvious reasons because of Barnabas and Angelique and Quentin and Chris, and it that's what appealed to me as a queer youth or a budding queer youth, is that they were the cool people. The oddities. They were the cool ones. It was the regular Collinsport folk and the family members that were kind of like, yeah, but the oddities like Barnabas and Angelique, they all had something to hide, and you kind of like, I think you honed in on that. I think that the LGBTQ community in particular, speaking for myself, that is part of what the appeal was and is to Dark Shadows. Just part of being the
It was like
part of
the
the
X-Men.
disenfranchised.
I, Michael, I'm actually curious. Um, does Ligia, does she like the show? Your wife?
Ah, she does. She loved, and bless her soul, her favorite is Angelique.
It
Her
is.
favorite
Okay,
is
got it.
Angelique. That's her girl. Now they don't. None of them do the way I do, and after a while, they have to. She'll remind me. Okay, we are about 16 episodes in, and we were promised we were just going to watch one or two of these and then move on to something else.
It's almost
But she
Monday.
does. She likes it. She doesn't like the audio drama. I tend to listen to the audio dramas at night when I go to sleep,
Ah,
and she'll say, somebody's talking in my ear. Please turn that off. Because she doesn't like that type. She'd rather hear music or something. But she likes it. I think the joke around here is, let's say this is about my family and the show affecting me. Somebody said to my son, my youngest son, "I love how your father dresses," or something along those lines. Your father dresses pretty nice, or whatever. My son, I thought was my son was gonna. He was very taken aback, and he said, "My father dresses like a 200-year-old vampire because of the cane." I do use the cane a lot, but all of my guys, Barnabas used a cane, Clifton Webb as Mr. Belvedere, and several other I loved cane, so it's very much, to me, it's natural, but I suppose it does look a little bit dated. So, but yeah, she. There are times when she likes it and times when she just puts up with it.
can,
Usually I
can,
sneak it in though.
you just reminded me of something, and so much for my not being on camera often. Um, a couple of weeks ago, I was picking up my husband from the gym, and um, I walk with a cane uh, every day, and because I need it. So
as
I,
as a result of a medical accident.
yep. And so I get to where we're going, and I realize I don't have my cane, which was a Harvey cane, ebony shaft, silver plated nickel alpaca wolf head, the actual Dark Shadows cane from the actual company. And I realized that when I got into the car, it was on the roof. And I have gone to every police station within 15 miles of here, and nobody has turned in said cane. So, anyway, I thought I'd throw that in.
Shame on them because somebody's got it.
And Michael and I have had this conversation about the cane because I got now. Some of you may know this or you may not know this, but the cane, all of that stuff was Ramsey Mustaller's idea. Apparently, that she came up with the look. She came up with the ring. The ring was imparted to me by people who worked with Jonathan, came from Woolworths. It came from the local Woolworths costume jewelry counter. And I guess what would happen is over time, they would lose them or they would break and they would have to run back to the store and they'd say, well, we're all out of the onyx ones, but we have them in green. And so they would just grab a green one, get a little black nail polish, and paint it so that he would have a new onyx ring for that day's episode. But that's how they treated the rings. They came from Woolworths. And then the cane was located at Uncle Sam the Umbrella Man on 57th Street, just adjacent to Carnegie Hall. And we had found out at the first festival I went to that the canes were still being made. I believe at the time they were going for about $275. So I knew I had to have one of those canes because that wooden nursing home cane that they had given me was just not going to cut it. I had to have the real schmagiggy. I wanted the real thing. So the following Christmas, my grandparents, we went into the city. We went to Uncle Sam the Umbrella Man, and I was like, "Where do you keep your wolf head canes?" So they bought me my very own wolf head cane when I was 13 years old. That Christmas, I guess that was 90 Christmas of 91, Christmas of 1991. They got me my first wolf head cane, and that was really cool. That was really cool. And not a lot of people had them at that time at the festivals. So when I would go to a festival, they would inevitably someone would come up to me
Want
and
to
go, "Where
touch it?
did you get that? Oh yes, can I please take a photo with it? Can I, people would want to pose with the cane."
Well,
But we
can I
look
tell you my
upon it
cane
as a
story?
very expensive prop. You and I both like, I mean, it's like
Well, the jewelry and the mansions and the look were almost a character of the show in the show. Like
yeah.
I think to myself now, no Cain, no Cape, no Barnabas. You could part with maybe, I don't know, the bangs, which by the way I love. You said Barna bangs. I thought that
The
was
Barna Bangs.
absolutely brilliant. Barna bangs, that was great. But you can't part. That was those were like it's like getting rid of the Enterprise on Star Trek or the robot. They just the things you can't do. My main story, I think we got them at the same year because we were. I, as a kid, I'd call and hunt around places to see if they had a wolf head cane, because in my mind, you were not getting the Barnabas cane. That was a one of a kind, found in Collinsport, Maine cane that was made by some warlock off of some mountain somewhere, and So I'd call around to see if they had a wolf head, and if they didn't have a wolf head, which nobody ever did, they'd have perhaps a fox head. So I'd said, "Do you have a cane with a head of a fox or something, a canine on it?" And this woman said in downtown Baltimore, "Yes, we have a lovely fox-tipped cane." And I thought, oh, well, maybe it'll look kind of, at least if nothing else, like the Lawrence Talbot cane. So I talked my father into going down. I was a sophomore when I was 15 years old, and I was around 91. And I went to it would have been 1990. We went down, and she showed us the cane, and this place had canes galore. It was everywhere. She showed us it was in the little tiny like the ring basket, like the umbrella basket. She showed us the wolf. It was like butt cane. It was just a little ball head. I thought, oh God, that won't do. So I went to the back of the store, and on a display against the wall, they had these very fancy canes, and there it was. And it was $275, which in those days was, that was money, baby. So my father said, "We can't, I don't. What do you think? I carry that in my pocket? We're getting this cane." Who was also the man that denied me the ascot and the cape. So I thought that was it, And after a minor, I know one might say tantrum, after a few moments, hours of speaking to him, we left. Anyway, it was a miserable day for me.
Aw.
Well, that was probably March, and I mean, because like you, I'd fantasize. You really think these like in the show, the cane was a weapon. It was a accessory. It was magic. The stuff of magic. Fantasizing about it. So my birthday came, and what I didn't know was my father put it on layaway, and he had been making payments on it, and he bought it for me for my birthday. Now, this is a very true story about how much Dark Shadows comes in, intrudes upon our lives. Um, my father had gone in an odd direction at a certain point in his life, and so after that, I hadn't seen him for a while. And then, out of the blue, I could not get him off of my mind, and I carried that cane. And I was in high school at this point, everywhere with me for a solid week. Solid week. This cane went everywhere with me. 17 years old, and with a cane for no reason at all. Having dinner and all this, we went to my friends. We went out to a nice restaurant. I had the cane with me. Anyway, that Sunday, Father died. And that cane was, and he used to say to me, "This is a nice heavy cane. You can pass this down. This could be something that can be in our family for generations." Because apparently it had affected him the same way. He thought this piece would last forever. So it's a very meaning. In fact, I'm toying with the fact of putting it in a display and never using it again because I'm terrified to break it and getting another one just to use because that's how much that cane means to me. So it's the same. We must have gotten it at the same time, same price, same year. It was pretty cool.
Yep.
That's pretty interesting. Talk about serendipity or
Really?
synchronicity. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, that was a cool
Hmm.
trip. And just a little piece of interesting trivia. I think it was finally 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. I was having dental work done on that same block. Also, Grayson Hall lived on that same strip. I believe she lived like 2 blocks away from Uncle Sam the Umbrella Man, over by Carnegie Hall. But he was the last holdout. They were looking to tear down that entire block. And my dentist at the time said, he will not give in. They have torn everything. That's the only building. And finally, I think they offered him like 10 gazillion dollars. And he finally sold the shop. So now Uncle Sam's is just what does Thayer would say at the end? The dark shadows of the distant past. It's
Never was a vampire seen in the woods or whatever it was.
right for the first time. The
That was a fairy tale show for kids, and I mean, you think about it, it really did remove you to another world. I mean, it was like a Brigadoon. The houses, the panels, the passageways. One of the major things for me was the damn that chest of jewels because there was something about the quality of the camera in those earlier episodes where the jewels, I mean, to me, the jewelry store should get that camera and try and sell jewelry. It popped. I mean, in that candlelight, those fake diamonds popped, you know?
I was thinking of you because, given what I do for a living, on the side, I thought you would love this. This is right out of Barnabas's chest of jewels for Miss Evans.
Oh my God.
You
This
know,
was
one
my
of one of
mother's. I hope
those,
there would be someone to wear this. I
right?
love that.
Isn't it great?
Go to the jewelry box. We need money.
We need money.
I love that. That is right out of there.
That's one of my
Billy
favorite
must have
moments,
known
by
a
the
good
way,
fence.
with Dennis Patrick and Johnny Carlin. Where he's just like, you need to get out of here. Take this. It's worth a fortune. They're sealed up in the wall. And he's determined he's going to open that coffin. And it's
John
classic.
Carlin said once, he's like, Willie's main job, he said it seemed like for a while, was trying to talk people into leaving or not getting killed. He said he felt like he was always saying, get out of here, don't do that, don't push anymore, leave her alone. Always trying to save people from. But that scene you're talking about is first of all that tension. Have you ever? This is going to sound like a terrible comparison. Have you ever seen Midnight Mother
No.
with Anne Bancroft?
First, I
So
love Anne
the
Bancroft. Never
movie
seen
is.
it.
Oh, it's her and Sissy Spacek, and Sissy Spacek is her daughter, and they're alone somewhere in the country. The crux of the story is she's decided to take her own life, and Anne Bancroft is spending the entire movie trying to talk her out of killing herself. The tension in that movie is palpable thanks to Anne Bancroft. But it's the same thing in that even though Jason McGuire is a complete, tool, but brilliantly done, you don't want him to die. Barnabas was a very, and we've had this discussion too 1,000 times. Barnabas was a very different guy in those early days, and you were kind of, I mean, you're doomed, man. He was more like Court Barlow in those earlier episodes than he was the Barnabas that we loved. that that terrible creature on a hill that, in fact, to that end was when David had this conversation with the not so fun Dr. Woodard, not the good Dr. Woodard, but the kind of Conrad Bain on steroids, Dr. Woodard, when he said, I know what you're going to do. It's got to be me. Burke is out of town. I can't, I tried to get Burke to go with me. He's not here. And he says to David, I'm afraid of thinking of what Barnabas really is, and I'm afraid of what he's going to do to me. I was like, that's right out of Salem's Lot. That's not Dark Shadows. That's scary.
You should know I was watching that last night. I was watching that clip last night.
There it is again, synchronicity. Yeah,
So
that's, I mean, that
funny.
is
And he's
palpably
telling David,
frightening.
he's telling David, I saw Sarah. I spoke to her, and, well, what are we going to do about Barnabas? Because I think he's dead. And, I think that was his cause. Peter Turgeon was not my favorite, and it's not fair because he was a replacement, but he didn't have that. I can only imagine those scenes played out with Robert Geringer, especially
Mm.
the scene where he finally, pops him with the hypodermic. I think it would have been
I think people
even.
would it would have given a whole different feeling. And maybe it was better that it wasn't him because I think people would have liked Barnabas less if he had killed the original because he was such a likable guy, and would have maybe, or worse, would have liked Grayson Julia, Julia less. The ghost voice, that ghost voice is painful. But he, the those Dark Shadows. It's funny. I tell my kids this all the time. You watch these older movies and shows, and because you're so accustomed to them, you're not you sentimentalize them, or you don't see them as horror until something small happens. And I was in my 40s when I realized, my God, he has not only, I mean, this was a hero of mine, many of ours growing up. He not only bit Maggie, which he had to because of survival, he kidnapped her. He used his abilities to try and brainwash her. He kept her for God knows how long it was supposed to be in that storyline. I don't know how months or year or whatever it was supposed to be. Locked her up and locked her in a coffin. I mean, this is not the same guy who's going back in time to save David, who he also incidentally was going to kill at one point. you know, he found it slightly regrettable, but he was going to off the kid. It People will forget that thing, I guess, but it was but we've had the whole
But
PTSD conversation.
that's what I was about to go. And like, it's like you have to remember, if you've been chained in a coffin for 200 years, you're going to have some serious issues, especially when you've begged people to put you out of your misery. Your own father, which we find out later on. I mean, and but they do allude to that, even though they don't quite know where they're going to take that storyline. Frid says at least twice, my father could have shown me mercy, but he chose not to.
That's my favorite quote in that series.
Or what he thought what he was doing was an act of mercy, but it was no act of mercy to me.
That's when
So,
you start
like,
to see Barnabas as a human,
yeah, yeah.
you know.
It's kind of like, all right, you did this to me, and now I'm a little bit pissed off.
Why do they, that wouldn't be another, just if the right person were to get a hold of it, even in a mini, just let's talk about the countdown to Barnabas's temporary madness. Like, we don't realize, again, people sentimentalize the fact that he lost his best friend to his love, the love of his life, to his sister, to himself in one immediate swoop.
Yep.
It was not like he even had time to adjust. It was one dearly loved person after the other, and had no ability to stop, and then had to deal with the fact that now I have to kill people to survive.
Yes.
What is it? And Eugene Levy said in Splash, "What a week I'm having! What a week I'm having!" You know,
That's
it's just,
right.
it's the
When he
same kind of
goes
deal.
down the
Like,
chute.
that would be a wonderful, right, right. What you think, like, people, we forget that that would screw anybody up. And then to be probably hungry and driven mad. I mean, as an Italian, you don't go well without food. 275 years without eating, anybody's going to be pissed off. So all of that, I wish they would do. We could do. There's so many things that still can be done with that brilliant show.
You wonder. I mean,
Mm-mm.
that is one, and I know we chatted because you were not crazy about the 2004 unpicked up pilot.
It wasn't bad. It didn't have the grandeur to me, and it was a pilot. I mean, give me a break. It's a pilots never do, but it didn't. It was missing some of that. Like, I mean, that kind of not only the grandeur, but the elegance of the characters to me were like, I mean, Gene, which was hard. They probably didn't have money, but Gene Simmons and
It was too. It
Barbara
was, and it was also
Steele.
too much. They were trying to cram too much
Yeah.
into what, like 55 minutes. I think it was. It was something like 55 minutes. But what I
Hmm.
did like was the fact that because there are so many variables that they went the kind of hammer route, and you see that he did starve to death. He's not dead. He's just kind of inanimate because he hasn't been fed.
That was brilliant.
And all of a sudden, is it Jessica? No, wait, I'm trying to remember. Willie has a girlfriend. I want to say her name is Jessica,
There were
and
two of them. Yeah.
she slices her hand, and that's what all of a sudden blip 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 blip, blip and there he is again.
It touches his lips, doesn't it? Just like in the Dracula movie. And he looked great. That costume, that makeup was great. He
Yeah.
looked, and it was scary. That was creepy as shit. Are we allowed to swear on here?
Yes.
No
Yes.
filthy words. Any filthy words? That was scary as shit. Now to the credit of the series of the pilot, they were, and this is one of the and I hear tell of it's coming back and it's not coming back and it's coming back, and I don't know what the problem is because Jonathan Harris said a lot of executives, studio executives, are stupid. He said you're dealing with monkeys that don't know the public, they don't know television, they don't know shit. But it's true because you get the right people who have the right passion and the right imagination, and you give it like I think Ms. Parker said, like Merchant Ivory have had a brilliant touch to Dark Shadows. They did those great period pieces. Somebody who could come along and do like the Edwardian era, that whole like she did with Joan, that when Joan Bennett, Elizabeth was young. You can do
Wolf
things
Moon
now, not
Rising.
only technologically speaking, right? I mean, Laura Parker. She doesn't get any of the credit she deserves. I'm just gonna from outside of Dark Shadows. The woman was a genius, but um, they could go places and never stop with Dark Shadows. I mean, it's as limitless as Star Trek, really. And now, because of the age that we live in, you can get into meteor like before. Like Barnabas was sort of an addiction, kind of, or anybody with a secret kind of thing. Now you can talk about some of those secrets. Like we were talking about earlier. The homoerotic thing between Willie and him being a little juiced because of his shared bond with Barnabas. Like he's got a little bit more to him than he was before. That's an interesting take. I mean, our Willie, who we love, and it was savage to me that he was bit on the wrist. That was as a kid. That was very savage to me that
Yeah.
he just mainly grabbed whatever he could grab and put it in my little head. But now this Willie is like, wait a minute, now I'm a little bit stronger. I see a little bit better. I neigh a little bit sexier, and he's got this thing going with Barnabas. Nobody can quite put their hand on, what's happening here. He is a vampire. We all know what that's about. There's so much more you can do and get a wider, you know, what the
Let me
hell is
tell
the
you,
problem?
with Matt Zuckery as Willie, I would have loved to put my hand on it. It's-
it it's a juicy. Is the fellow name that he's the Vampire Diaries guy. I think he's the one who wants to do this, right? He's the writer from Vampire Diaries.
oh, Mark B. Perry, you mean?
He's the one that's trying to get this moving, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
A new
This
series, a sequel
continuum.
series.
Yeah,
What is going on? What is the problem? I mean, what it does not take a genius to see that there's a gold mine here.
and it's got to be the right
But I have to say this though.
service.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Because the problem is like I've noticed it a little bit with Peacock. Forget like they have something for one season and then it's gone like that. We need a really
Right.
good streaming service that's going to take it and run with it. You know, Alan
Hmm.
Alda said this back in the '90s, which is true of the original, the remake. You know, if they don't get the ratings they want in the second commercial of the pilot, they'll cancel the friggin' thing.
Yeah.
You gotta give your audience a chance to build up.
Bingo. That's exactly. I would love to see Netflix do it because they're pretty good with period pieces.
Sure.
And Sabrina, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina was brilliant, and the pandemic killed Sabrina. Just
Yeah.
like the war killed the revival, the pandemic hit, and they told the actors nobody's going to be interested in this anymore. And I actually wrote to one of the writers on Twitter and said, "You guys, it had so many pop culture references. You guys need to get Laura Parker or David Selby on here. The audience will freak out if you
Yeah.
get. I mean, they have Veronica Cartwright on there, and the town doctor was Doc Fives. Come on, where's Angelique? It's about witches in this, from a thing from the 60s. You got to have Angelique. People just do not see. He was very supportive. They actually, can I tell you a little secret? They lifted a whole episode of Dark Shadows for Sabrina. There's an episode when the head of the coven, Bob Blackwood, gets the older Anne, played by Miranda Otto, to marry him, and she becomes almost a Stepford wife.
Right.
She's moving about the house almost like a robot, and he controls her with a music box.
Yep.
That's
So
all lifted
funny.
from Maggie and Barnabas.
There you go.
So,
That's also one of my favorite
hey,
storylines.
hey.
That's one of my favorite
Mm.
storylines on the show. I loved all of the tension that went along with that storyline. Um, the escape when I mean, I sat on the edge of my 12-year-old seat when she finally gets the wall in the cell to open up, and just watching them go through those endless corridors, and you hear the London Bridge flute in the background guiding her to the right door. It just left me on the edge of my seat. And then she finally makes it to the beach. She's tattered and torn, and the ragged dress is even all ripped up. And all of a sudden, you see that shadow standing over her saying, "Did you really think you could escape from me?" It was great.
I remember those were the days when he slept in his cape.
He slept in his cave.
He would
That's
come out of
right.
the coffin and the cape would be on. Those were the early days. But that was when the old house as a kid to me was really interesting. Because of those corridors that even, I mean, Barnabas was unaware of, like, wait a minute, where the hell did this come? And the whole tension between, we talked about this before too. Sarah, as a little tiny ghost that you felt so sorry for, and she even made reference to the fact that I'm lost, I can't find anybody. That is heartbreaking, but she was a Collins, and she had that streak. I mean, she blew those doors open to save Dr. Hoffman, and she said, "I've got to go. Somebody needs me." And she told Barnabas, "I'm not coming back." And baby, she didn't. I'm not coming back until you've learned. And she did not. So, that was the tension between Barnabas and Sarah, because he was a little afraid of her.
Yes.
What do you mean you've seen my sister? Until we get to, and we've had many a chat about this, and this is like a family joke. My family says this. Anyone but you.
Oh.
That whole scene, that's like a favorite. That whole conversation is just brilliant. The two of them are like 12-year-olds.
Like on the playground, and then just her reaction. He's like, "No more words." And she's
Oh, oh. He turns on a dime. My oldest son said, "Man, he got triggered quick because he's fine, fine, fine." She says it one more time, and he turns, and that mitt of his, that mitt of his comes at her, and it's like, "You've done too
John,
much." Boom.
what did you want to add? Because you're join in on the conversation, please.
No, sure. I'm kind of working the social channels behind the scenes. Robbie Cochran actually asked the question almost at the same time you brought it up. Is there any news about another reboot that Dan Curtis's daughters were interested in doing. But then it goes further, and he says, and in my opinion, unfortunately, says, I think Ryan Murphy could do a great reboot. The challenge, my opinion first, the challenge with that, Robbie, is that um, one of the advantages to Mark B. Perry doing this story is that he was one of the original writers for Wonder Years. He was one of the original writers for Party of Five. So there would be a sensibility to the show that was rooted in reality. Um, but he was also a fan of the show. And I think that that is really critical in whoever moves forward with this project. And Dan Curtis's daughters have endorsed Mark B. Perry to do the project. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
I just know that he said he wants it. I'll mention Penny Dreadful because Penny has a wonderful
We love you,
chat
Penny.
show. Yeah, wonderful podcast of her own, and I need to do catching up on Penny's show. But we did tune in for Mark B. Perry, and he said he was committed to bringing back the Collinwood that everyone knew. Essentially, you're going to get the sets. You're going to get Cy Thomasoff's Collinwood, only it's not going to shake this time. But it's going to look the way it did. The old house will look the way it did. Josette's room will look the way it did. We'll keep everything that the fans love. Because you got to get the fans. You've got to get the hardcore fans because that's what gets the good word of mouth. They want to use the music. He wants to revitalize the theme, which let me do a little shout out to my musical director, Ike Reeves, for doing our theme for us at the top of the show, giving it that kind of fun techno, and putting Shadows of the Night in there as a surprise. But
That
I
was
think
great.
I thought, yeah, Ike did a great job. So he's like, but then he said he wanted to go down, no pun intended, other corridors. He's like, we always see them going to this study, but we never see the hallway. And I think he mentioned something about, I want it to be something like the hallway of death, where there's like a kind of a tribute to, and Mark, if you watch this, or Penny, forgive me if I get this wrong, I think he said something to the effect of like, different ways that people in the family had died, very bizarre ways. This whole hallway that leads to Roger's study in the library, like, let's show them other. That's where they can make up their own rooms that we never saw in the original show. So giving nods to the original, but as well as adding their own little new nuances to it. So I kind of like
Like
that.
the like the hallway in the old House of Usher movie where the was it the Ushers that well the Corman movie where they all look weird and warped. They were sort of impressionistic portraits. Something like, oh, that would be. Oh, I pray to God this guy can. Well, he'd. We were talking about this. A lot of people don't realize. I'd seen a doco, as they say in Australia, on vampires and modern called pop culture, and they talk about how the original the story the old stories about vampires, they were ghoulish and more like the Nosferatu, ugly bad
Sure.
breath, and they came just for blood, and they were more savage and Court Barlowy in the movie. And then Bram Stoker, his version of Dracula was this kind of what we have for Barnabas, a noble, elegant, handsome, sort of sexy guy that it became more about sex than violence. And this documentary went from there to Anne Rice, rest her soul. Lizzie, God rest her soul until I get there. But anyway, um,
Thank
the,
you, Sophia
that's a
Petrillo.
that's a Sophia thing, isn't it? He said, this guy says, oh, it wasn't until Lestat and Louis, was it Louis, the
Louis.
Brad Pitt character,
Louis.
that we actually started to we just now got a vampire that we could that was sympathetic and was guilty about what he'd done, and I actually made it real. I thought to myself, that's terribly unjust. She ripped that off of Barnabas Collins. She took that from Jonathan, which was Jonathan Frid's contribution. Like, people don't realize, and sometimes I hope he realized how much he impacted pop culture by just by playing him like a guy with a problem. and
it
I don't know even where I was going,
no,
but just
yeah, yeah,
Dan
it's
Perry seems to have a
and she was very, I believe, very open mouthed about the fact that she loved the show. She was influenced by the show. I mean, Interview with a Vampire is essentially 1970 parallel time with Will Loomis and Barnabas being locked up in the coffin without locking him up in the coffin, but still that, obviously that the show had such an impact on her that it informed her own work. But no, we wouldn't have any of these sympathetic vampires if it wasn't for Jonathan Frid, Ron Sproat, Malcolm Marmosteen, and Joe Caldwell, because, and God rest you, Mr. Curtis, but it was not Dan's idea. It was, I, again, someone out there keep me honest. I believe there was a 2 week strike. I don't know if it was Screen Actors Guild or if it was writers or who it was. So it preempted Jonathan starting when he was supposed to start. And so they met and had a meeting at the studio about the direction they wanted to take the character in. He told them, I'm not interested in playing a vampire. Ron Sproat made sure he got hired because he knew from their old Yale days together that Jonathan would do more with the character than the average actor would. Because Dan really only wanted Count Dracula, and they wanted to do more with it, and Jonathan wanted to do more with it. And Dan was away in London doing pre production for Jekyll and Hyde with Jack Palance. Comes back, sees what they're doing, and apparently was really pissed off. He was not happy that they were giving him those long, faraway stares. I mean, that wonderful monologue that Joe Caldwell wrote about, now you got to come up with me to the top of the old house so we can watch the sunrise together. And that look when he's just like sunrise, and it's so perfect.
that pain. There's a there's a lady who does animation, some nice animation, and they're on YouTube, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but she's got this, the love theme for a vampire from Dracula,
Okay.
the '90s version with Annie Lennox. So she puts that to. No, I'm sorry, I'm telling a lie. She puts another song, but it's a very sad song. And her animation is Barnabas doing just that, staring off at the sea. So you get a rear view of him on Widow's Hill, looking, from behind looking. And that's what you're saying is true. That that stare off into the distance into eternity, wondering where things went wrong and when are they going to get right again? Are they ever going to get right again? He brought all that, into play. And well, I'll tell you another thing. Barnabas took a turn like my guy Dr. Smith did. You cannot have a deep dyed villain forever. People get bored. You have to add a dimension to it
Yeah.
that isn't on the paper, and he did just that. He added, and I don't know that he did it on purpose. I don't know that he wanted to be on that long, but he, by God, it took off. He hit gold. He will never be another Barnabas.
No, it's certainly not the way Frid. I mean, and again, there'll be other capable actors. Ben did a beautiful
Oh,
job,
sure,
and I
yeah.
think Ben did. He put his own spin on it, but there certainly were nods to what Frid. In fact, I was watching the episode where he turns into the old man about a week ago, and when Carolyn just happens to come over to the old house with a message, and he attacks her, not even realizing who he's attacking. He just knows that he
Right.
needs to revert. And Willie comes in, and Willie's crying as he's watching him, engorge her neck. And Barnabas looks up and he lets out a wail that is
I
so
know.
pulverizing. Like he's so sorry for what he's just done. He had to do it, but it's just this primal scream that he lets out. And like to me, that's a nod to Jonathan.
Well, what's funny is that the two of them, or perhaps as the character itself, have this quality that as a kid and even now as an adult I admire is that like when something like that awful happens to Barnabas, be it old or Ben Cross, he's in agony, but he manages to pull himself up, and he'll say, he realizes this has to go on. So he'll, like, I think there's a something he says something to Willie at some point, like you got to learn how to control your fear or your nerves or something along those. Because being
Right.
Italian, people are not good with that. Emotion goes right here. And it stays a long time. Right. So to me, that's almost Vulcan-like, to be able to just, okay, this is done. It's time to be calm. I'm upset about this, but it and Ben Cross does that beautiful thing with his hand, Carolyn, and he pulls his hand out, Carolyn, blood of my blood, or stands her up very calmly. That whole scene is he just decompresses, gets her up, moves, wipes his mouth off. That's great too. Wipes his mouth and goes on.
Yeah.
Jonathan's famous was, "It won't be old much longer." I love that too.
That's got to be one of the most horrifying scenes in the series. That's truly frightening because it's the antithesis of what Ben does. I mean, he's fully aware of who she is. You've got poor Julia standing on the other side of the coffin saying, "Just go now before it's too late."
Right, right. And then you know what? That comes back, and is it the Quentin timeline? There's a timeline when Barnabas Lee. I think it's when they've all gone mad, when they go to the '90s and everybody is a wreck.
To
The
1995.
Gerard
Yep.
time, and he says, "I regret how I treated my family. Sometimes I wasn't always so kind to them." And my mind went immediately to Carolyn and David.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to kill David, and he did like Carolyn and use her as a puppet. And I have to tell you too, when he's bitten Carolyn, there's a period of nice tension there where any I don't want to say any guy, but anybody who has, you go through these points in your life when you hit it when you're young, you hit a hot streak. You go through dry spells and nobody likes you, and then you hit a hot streak and you've got like six people who like you, and you try to entertain that briefly, and then you start to see it crumble, and you're like, oh shit. Now, and you're trying to. There's a scene where Carolyn is kind of getting bitchy about, leave me alone, leave her alone or something, and he's bitten Vicky. And he's proud of himself. He says, Vicky's going to join us. And Carolyn's like, why couldn't you leave her alone? And then he says to Vicky later on, will I see you later on, my dear? And Vicky goes, no, not tonight.
Not
And you
tonight.
see it, he's like, oh, I thought I was in charge here, but okay. And he kind of like, you can relate to that. You can be like, oh, I know that the ship is sinking feeling. I've been on that boat before. I love that because that's a kind of human dimension to the character that we don't, you don't realize Barnabas had, even though he has those powers, had his bad moments with the girls too.
Well, and then even when Julia offers herself up to him, that's a great,
Oh
moment.
yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. I mean, you feel bad for. Yeah, she's willing. I'll give it all up. I'll totally give. I'll surrender
Yeah.
everything for you.
He acknowledges it too.
Yeah.
That you're a woman who prides herself on being strong-willed. You wouldn't have a will of your own anymore. Well, I'll tell you, there are two things that when I think of what you're talking about, there's the whole not, and every Dark Shadows fan loves this scene. Never without you. Never without you. In the Gerard
Yeah.
when she says, "Just go, leave me go," he says, and I'll do it again. And he says he hugs her and says, "Never without you." Every fan eats that up. And then in the Night Whispers, the audio thing, he's being revisited, and Willie is possessed by this spirit, and he's talking to Barnabas, and he brings up Julia, and he says, it makes Willie sad to see her try so hard, a little trinket here, a scarf there, a little makeup trying to get your attention, and you don't notice her. And he says to him, Julia is my closest companion. That is between me and Julia. And it takes my mind automatically back to when she says, me, I'll be your willing victim, and take me and all that. Your mind goes right because that's the first. connector between, because that's the first time he calls her Julia. You
Yeah.
would do that for me. You
Yeah.
know, that's the first big connector point between the two of them. And then it's crossed with the scene where he says, "You know, Willie, I find it interesting that you're so concerned about what happens to Miss Winters and not at all concerned about what I do to Dr. Hoffman." I thought, oh, poor Julia.
And even
uh, uh,
Carolyn, when he starts to play with her mind, I do love the fact that even though Carolyn's under his thrall, when she overhears in the anteroom behind the portrait the way he's shamelessly flirting with her, and she comes out and says, Barnabas, that was cruel. She really does care for you.
yeah. You're
And
tired.
that's
Doesn't he tell you you're tired? Go to bed.
you're tired. Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
you're just, yeah, you're tired. Go to. Now, I
that
wanted
is
to
hard.
mention
I know exactly what you mean.
I wanted to mention there were a couple of key scenes. There was a moment for me when I was collecting the tapes, and as I said, they would come every month. And I think this particular set was, let's see, it was what, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This was, I'm pretty sure it was around Easter time. David is being menaced by him. And Sarah is starting to let David in on more of the secret. Now, I'm watching this, and she's going to share with him the biggest secret that she knows. She takes him to the mausoleum. And, John, do you have that clip? Did we lose John?
Nope, I'm here.
You're there.
The one that says Peter or the one that says Michael?
The one that says Peter.
Okay.
So,
Let me know when.
yeah, go for it.
There's nothing here.
No,
Not a trace of it, not a trace of anything.
so I see.
Well, you didn't think she'd really be here, did you?
I had hoped she'd be here. Where is she?
Where? Well, she isn't here, and there's no point in us staying. Shall we go?
I suppose so. Willie, wait a minute.
Why?
Open the panel.
The panel? Well, you don't think she's in there, do you?
I've got to be sure.
Well, she wouldn't be in there, you know that.
Be quiet, Willie. Don't argue with me. Open the panel.
Now, just imagine being 13, 12 and a half, whatever the hell I was, and all of a sudden the credits come up and it says, stay tuned for more exciting episodes of Dark Shadow Show. I'm like, no! I was freaking out. I was freaking out. I couldn't believe it. Oh my God, how could they end it on this note? I was going to have to wait another month to find out what happened. I drove my godmother crazy because the tapes were being delivered to her house. They're not here yet, Peter. They're not here yet. I called MPI. They promised me they'll be here. On and on and on. Now, Tower Records also carried the tapes, and we made like weekly pilgrimages to Tower Records. One night, there's the next set 17, 18, 19, 20. And I'm like, oh my God, there's the next episode, volume 17. And my mother's like, well, great. I mean, if they're here, then obviously they're going to show up at Ancaros. I'm like, but I can't wait. I mean, just get the. Let me just get the first tape. Let me use it. You're not going to waste your allowance on a tape that is probably going to be at Aunt Carol's house tomorrow. The next day, there were no tapes. The day after that, there were no tapes. The day after, almost a week went by. We had a horrible snowstorm. It was a Friday. I'll never forget. My grandparents picked me up from school, and I went over to my grandfather, and I was like, Gramps. And he's like, what do you want, Peter? I said, I need you to do me a favor. Can you please take me over to the mall. I need to go to Tower Records. He's like, what do you, I'm like, I gotta go. I just gotta go to Tower Records. Like, so do you have money for what you need at Tower Records? I said, yes, I've got my allowance. He's like, all right, let's go. So he drove me over to Tower Records. I bought volume 17. My mom and aunt get home from work. They were PO'd because my granddad had a bum knee, so he really shouldn't have been driving in what was just been a really bad snowstorm. But he knew how important it was for me to find out what happened next. And they read me the riot act. They went out to eat. I stayed home. I found out what happened to David. And the next day, the tapes showed up at my aunt's
The friggin' tape showed up.
house.
Oh, life. Oh,
and,
fate.
and let me add a little
Revenge.
postscript to that. Let me add a postscript to that. I kept watching that tape over and over and over again, as if I played it enough times, magically the next episode would pop up. I was
Right.
convinced it
You
would
were
it would it
foreseeing CDs or DVDs.
yeah, that it would
You
be
were
there.
force you were seeing out the future.
So that
God,
was
you
one
know what
of
I
that
noticed
that's
with
a treasure moment.
kids? My grandfather never liked anything like that, and we lived when my parents split in '83, and we moved. We all lived in one neighborhood, probably like you. And we went. I moved in with my grandmother, my mother, and I. And my grandfather would let me watch Dark Shadows with him. It reminded me of that. Like he never liked that kind of stuff. He thought it was what he would say foolishness. But he never it was late at night. And that was those were two big strikes. Late at night, and then it was foolishness. But he never opened his mouth against. He sat in the living room and he would watch it with me. And he remember said something about said what do you say about Angelique? I believe that girl's a troublemaker. I don't know what he meant. But it's those moments that make the show so attractive. Those shared moments with family, and and
Yeah,
those damned cliffhangers. Dun dun dun. That famous music, which seemed to be
and
on.
waiting.
They did a great one when Nicholas Blair showed up. Oh, the waiting, yeah.
Especially with the tapes, because I mean, at least if you were watching the show real time, you only had to wait 48 hours before it would come back on the air again. But again, there would be these long gaps where MPI would drag their feet out getting the videotapes. Now, just in terms of that, we were talking about one of your favorite moments from the show recently,
Hmm.
and so I wanted to play that just to see what this does for you. So, John, roll Michael's clip.
You're forgetting one thing.
What?
Even if Mr. Collins does get a little too close to the truth, I have the means to deal with him. After all, he is only a human.
It is the truth of Angelique that I must know. Look at me closer. 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 Why? Because it is the eyes of Angelique I'm looking into.
You know!
Yes, Angelique, I know.
How did you discover that I am Angelique?
I am an astute observer.
Who are you? Or perhaps I should say, what are you?
A cousin of Quentin's and a friend of his and Maggie's.
Any man who can sear my eyes by staring into the eyes of my portrait in another room, and who can stand in my presence completely without fear, is more than just a friend and a cousin. He is not human.
Where did everybody
That's
go?
the best. I love that. I love when he Barnabas didn't fit into the vampire box. Like he wasn't just he had a little warlock in him. And I love that when Barnabas would do like the whole thing with Julia, and that the whole we talked about the Indian who taught him the magic power of the magic number of the universe. That and the
That's right.
great line in that was the things that keep you that bind you mortals to your daily dull lives. That he knew things that other people didn't know, and when he and the ceremony that show had sometimes were so like when he starts to mess with Trask, and he says something about the light or something, and there's a scene where he walks the candle out just outside the old house, and he holds the candle up, and the wind now, and the wind blows the candle. Those things made him more magical to me. He was so much more than just a vampire. And when he pulled that with looking into the portrait, oh my God, I got goosebumps watching that scene as a young teenager. Think, oh, he can do that. And I think to myself now, I guess the continuity was that he probably remembered the portrait from when she came as Cassandra that had power to it. It was more of a talisman than just a portrait, and they figured I could. And they never really defined his. Julia mentioned, "You've been bothering me with your psychic powers," but you never really, you never really get into what the limit was or what he could do, and that's why I love. And that's one of the things my father used to make this. He used to say to me, "You would love this show." They were always having power duels, power battles. Like there was always a battle going on between this and that and the other. And the whole Ptolemy timeline where you've got Angelique and Barnabas fighting Ptolemy with these psychic powers of theirs. She's actually trying to break into Ptolemy's mind. And Barnabas says to her at one point, she's like, "Don't be a fool. If I can't slow him down, so what the hell make you think you can?" He said, "I have advantages that you do not." And he disappears. That was mind blowing, that was wild, and it was like superhero stuff. There's a
Totally.
in the one audio drama, what the hell was it called? Uh, Bloodline or Blood something or other. She says they bring Barnabas. Quentin calls Barnabas back, and Maggie Evans has formed a sort of monster hunting mob. And they find Angelique hidden in a cave, and Quentin is there, and then Barnabas shows up, and she says something about we three, and she says the witch. We three, the unholy trinity, and she says the witch. And then Barnabas says the vampire, and Quentin says the werewolf, and that's where it ends. That's the sense that you got, that these three make this triune unit of magic. It's great.
Can we, as we enter the final few moments of our broadcast, can we spend a couple of moments and talk about Lamar?
Oh, of course, of
I'll
course.
be glad you two talk.
No,
Uh,
no.
no, we'll all share. I mean, for me, and we'll talk more about Lamar. For those watching, that's obviously her real name. You all know her as Lara Parker, but you know, Mary Lamar Ricky and my other half and myself, knew her affectionately as Mrs. Hawkins because that was her married name, or Mrs. H. She would always sign off her emails to DJ as Mrs. H.
Yeah, oh my God, she's on a cloud looking down. So no, as a radical, amazing feminist that she was, it was always Ms. H.
Ms. H. Forgive me,
No, it's
Ms.
okay, totally okay.
Ms. H.
Go ahead.
I mean, I met her at that first festival. I was 12 years old. I look 8 years old. Marie had christened me Barnabas Jr. that weekend because I was the only little boy walking around dressed up as Barnabas. And when I got to Lamar in the lineup, I had just started watching 1795, so I was intimidated by her. I thought, she was Angelique, and she just kind of looked at me, and I gave her a smile, and she gave me one of those looks. She was kind of like, those dimples. I could plant flower beds in those dimples. And she signed my program, and little did I know that we would forge a friendship. And I said that to her many times, later on. You never think that one day you're going to be friends, that Angelique is going to become your friend, or, crazy Jenny. That these people are going to become friends of yours and admirers of your work and want to work with you. you know how I feel, John. We always said it. She's our West Coast mom, just so lovely and supportive, and she just had that wonderful maternal quality about her. And I was heartbroken when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had just poured myself coffee when I walked into the living room and John dropped the phone and said, Lamar's gone. And
Katie called us.
yeah, her daughter, Katie, who we're good friends with, I mean, even talking about it now, it might makes my stomach sink because I just didn't, I thought she'd be around she had such an indomitable spirit. I thought she'd be around much longer.
Same page, obviously. It's hard to imagine her. Obviously, we have her work, and we still have her family. And at her heart, she was a Hawkins, and she was a mom, and she was a wife, and she was a grandmother to Wesley. You know, at the end of the day, there's so many things about her that I remember. One of the first things I remember was I had played Julia in a skit, and I was still dressed as Julia, and white lab coat, red hair, the whole 9 yards, 60s dress, and she and I used to love our wine and our chats over wine, and a fan came up to her and said, "Oh, can you tell me about the Incredible Hulk?" And she's like, "Excuse me?" "Yeah, tell me about the Incredible Hulk. Because you're Luke Banner's wife. You're the one who's drowning in the car." And she said, "I never got paid for it. Doctor, let's go get some wine." And she turned on her heel and grabbed my hands, and we went to have our wine. I used to love the fact that when we would go up to her house, that I knew that wine would be involved and that we would be staying for a night or two. I used to love her place because when you would get up to it, it's in the top of Topanga Canyon, way up in the mountain. The GPS kicks out 2 miles before you get to her house. And I knew that when we got up there, it was just us and the family, and we had no real contact with the outside world. Our cell phones didn't work consistently. I loved when she would say, both when she was exasperated or when she was waiting for you to come back with one of your comebacks, she would say, well. I love the fact also that the last time she was on the professional stage is in the production that I produced of the play that you wrote, which was an adaptation of A Christmas Carol called Mrs. Scrooge.
Yeah.
And she only left the stage once in 2 hours and 5 minutes. And
We'll talk about that at length. But yeah. The one of the things that we were thinking about this the other night. The very last professional off-Broadway show she ever did at all, and in Manhattan, I wrote especially for her. So that's something I'll always treasure. And when it was winding down, when that crazy weekend was winding down, we had a very special moment about it. But it's so cool to me that I got, in the looking back, that, oh my God, the very last big theatrical thing she did, I got to write for her. So that's something I'll always treasure.
And then last but not least is when we convinced her to come out of retirement, and at the skits, we were the first one to get her on stage at the skits as Angelique.
She asked, I want to be in the skits. Why can't I? Then I'll put you in the skits. You want to be in the skits? You're in the skits. And she was of her own volition. She wanted to do it.
And do you remember, a lot of people don't know this, but Lamar could sing. And as an example, she did the musical version of My Sister Eileen, which was called Wonderful Town in Summerstock. Twice she did it. But do you remember when you actually did a duet with her on stage? You were dressed as Endora, and she was Angelique, and you guys sang Two Lost Souls from Damn Yankees?
Yeah, she wanted to sing because she had been to see me so many times in cabaret shows, and she said, I want to sing with you. Let's do a musical number. So we had done, again, this is for another show, but just the Cliff Notes version or the Widow's Hill version of it is that um, we did a takeoff. We would do crossovers. So I did Scooby Doo and Barnabas 2, where I had the mystery gang coming to Collinsport. We did Golden Shadows, where the Golden Girls break down outside of Collinwood and get hooked up with the Collins family. And then we did Bewitched Shadows, which seemed like a no brainer to me to have Endora and Uncle Arthur showing up to have a powwow with Angelique.
You know who
So that
I
was
played.
so
I love him, Paulin.
so that was the last that was the last one act that I wrote,
Yeah.
and we did two Lost Souls together.
And
But
then,
but just
and
the other thing was, she had a beautiful what kind of style house was it? It was Spanish style. Her original house.
they actually, Jim Hawkins, her husband, is a general contractor, but he also really is a talented architect. And her two sons and Jim set up they bought this beautiful land and they set up a trailer. And Lamar, Katie was very small, tiny, tiny, baby. Lamar, her two sons, and Jim, they built this adobo house from 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 the cement all the way, and they did it in the natural tradition, taking the mud from the Topanga Mountains and mixing it to make the walls. Anyway, the last
She,
thing,
and she loved that house. She
loved.
loved that house. And then Jim built right next door what she referred to as more of a movie star house, which they were looking to sell, and for whatever reason, they were having a hard time selling it. So we were visiting, and we were in that movie star house, but it wasn't quite finished, and the other house down the road was still fully intact. They were still kind of sort of living in it. So at the end of the night, she turned to me and she said, "Well, we're going to be here, and so you guys can go and you can stay at the old house."
The old house.
And my jaw dropped. My jaw hit the floor, and I'm like, and John, and she's like, what? I said, John's like, Lamar, think about what you pretend you're Angelique for a moment and think about what you just said to my husband. And she's like, that's right, Peter. Angelique has just invited you to spend the night at the old house.
Love that. And I'll leave
That's brilliant.
with two things. She had the most beautiful eyes of any person I've ever seen in person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You, I could fall and I did fall in love with her for so many reasons. And then last was when Katie was graduating from film school. She needed a project. She went to Philadelphia School of the Arts, and Lamar called Peter and said, "Do you think that Katie could follow you for a year and do her graduation project on you, becoming Judy?" Anyway, I know she loved and respected you. So, on that note, if you guys want to wrap up, 2 minutes each, I think we're there, guys.
Well, don't leave the panel here because it
Okay.
is dark. It is dark Shad-Bros. So I am so glad that we finally got to do this. I hope that the people that tuned in enjoyed it. I know it was kind of last minute, but it will be up on YouTube, right, John? We'll have this up on YouTube.
It actually has been simulcasting to YouTube this whole time.
Great, great. So we're on board to do more of this, and we'll like pick different topics from week to week. I just wanted to get a basic introduction to how we all fell in love with Dark Shadows and some of our favorite moments. And there's so much to talk about: the MGM feature films, various storylines, favorite characters, all that stuff. So I'll put it over to you, Michael.
I've had a great time. Thanks for having me. It's almost therapeutic to talk about. It does you, it does the soul good to talk about a joined love. Um, I just hope it wasn't, as a friend of mine described, a typical conversation with me like this. Catching butterflies out of midair. I tend to, the mind tends to, when the mind rambles, you can only imagine what the mouth does. So it was a lovely time, and I can't wait to do it again.
The one thing I want to point out here is because a couple of people have said this and it kind of miffs me that Dark Shadows is in danger of being forgotten. I don't quite understand that at this point in time. It's on Tubi TV. It's on Amazon Prime. I think there's another streaming service that carries
Peacock
it.
had it for a while, or maybe still has it.
Okay, so you've got that.
So
There's new merchandise coming out. I mean, there is a proposed continuum. I don't think Dark Shadows at this point in time is ever going anywhere.
No way. It is not. And there's a celebration of life for Lara Parker on July 5th, which is a Friday, in Burbank at the Burbank Marriott. There's a
Yes.
Jonathan Frid
Centennial.
celebration of life for his centennial
Yep.
on that Saturday the 6th. And at the last count I saw, there's over 3,000 people already going that weekend. So Dark Shadows is not going
there you
anywhere.
have it.
All right, guys. Ike Reeves, we love you. I'm going to play this one more time because I love this overture that he did. So here we go.
Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Good night.